Keanu Reeves walked through the restless city of Metroville, his steps steady and unhurried despite the chaos around him. Neon lights flickered off the glass windows of skyscrapers, and pedestrians rushed past him, too absorbed in their own world to notice the way he moved. Calm, purposeful. On one particularly crowded street corner, near a modest pizza shop called Grandon Pizza, a man sat slumped against a brick wall. His clothes were tattered, his hands rough from exposure to the elements. His name was Dawson, and his sign, written with shaky handwriting on a worn piece of cardboard, simply read, "Can you spare $1? Any help appreciated." Most people walked past without a second glance. Some spared him a fleeting look of sympathy before turning away. Others were too preoccupied with their own concerns to notice him at all. It wasn't just the hunger gnawing at his stomach that hurt. It was the invisibility. Dawson gripped the sign tighter. $1 wouldn't solve his problems, but it would buy him a slice of pizza. Something warm, something to remind him of better days. He inhaled deeply, trying to ignore the overwhelming exhaustion pressing down on him. Then a man stopped. Not just any man, someone who seemed oddly familiar. He stood a short distance away, observing Dawson in a way that was neither judgmental nor dismissive. It was as if he were genuinely considering something. Finally, he stepped closer. His movements were unhurried, his demeanor calm. Unlike the others, he didn't avoid Dawson's gaze. "Hey," the man said, his voice quiet but warm. "How's it going?" Dawson looked up warily. It wasn't often that people actually spoke to him. "I've been better," Dawson muttered, unsure where this conversation was going. The man glanced at the sign, reading it aloud as if measuring the weight of each word. Then, after a beat, he asked, "Is $1 really all you need tonight?" Dawson hesitated, his face burned with shame. He hated being in this position. "Just enough for a bite to eat," he admitted. The man nodded thoughtfully, then turned and walked into Grandon Pizza. Dawson exhaled, half expecting him to disappear like so many others before. He had seen this before. People pretending to care, only to leave once they'd had their moment of fleeting sympathy. But a few minutes later, the man returned. In his hands was a fresh pizza box and a cup of soda. Without a word, he placed them beside Dawson and sat down next to him, as if they were just two old friends sharing a meal. "There you go," the man said with a nod. "Please, eat." Dawson hesitated for only a second before hunger took over. He opened the box, the aroma of melted cheese and tomato sauce hitting him instantly. His stomach clenched painfully. He took a bite, the warm food nearly bringing tears to his eyes. "Thank you," he managed between bites. I really appreciate this." The man simply smiled. "No problem. Mind if I sit with you?" Dawson shook his head, still stunned by the man's kindness. There was something about him, something unrushed, as if he had all the time in the world. "So," the man said gently, "what's your story?" Dawson froze. Most people didn't care about that. They saw his clothes, his situation, and assumed everything they needed to know. But this man was different. "You really want to hear it?" Dawson asked skeptically. "I'm listening." Taking another bite of pizza, Dawson sighed. "I used to be an electrician," he began. "Had steady work, a small apartment. Nothing fancy, but I was making it." The words felt foreign now, like a story that belonged to someone else. "Then everything fell apart. My mom got sick, real sick." He swallowed hard. "I spent everything trying to help her. Worked overtime, took on side jobs, some of them pretty sketchy, but in the end it wasn't enough. She passed away and I was left with nothing. Lost the apartment, lost my job, lost everything." The man nodded, his expression sympathetic but not pitying. "That's a heavy burden," he said softly. Dawson looked away, blinking back the sting in his eyes. "Friends I thought I had disappeared. Family wasn't around, so here I am." For a moment they sat in silence. The world around them continued. People laughing, cars honking, life moving on. Then the man said something that made Dawson pause. "You used to fix things for a living," he mused. "What if you could get back to that?" Dawson let out a hollow laugh. "That part of my life is over. No one hires guys like me. No money for tools, no references, nowhere to stay. The man leaned back slightly, considering. Everyone deserves a second chance, he said. Sometimes they just need a little help. Dawson studied him more closely. There was something familiar about him. The kind eyes, the gentle smile. Where had he seen this man before? Then it hit him. Wait a second. Dawson's eyes widened. You're Keanu Reeves. Keanu smiled softly, not denying it. I guess you found me out, Dawson stared in disbelief. What? Why are you here? Talking to me? Keanu's gaze was steady. Because it matters. You matter. Dawson felt something inside him crack, an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Then Keanu stood up and held out his hand. Come on, he said. Let's start with a warm place to stay. Dawson hesitated. A part of him wondered if this was real, if it was some kind of dream or a camera stunt for a TV show, but the sincerity in Keanu's eyes was undeniable. And really, what did he have to lose? With a deep breath, Dawson reached out and took his hand. As they walked through the bustling city streets, a strange sense of hope stirred inside him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like something might actually change. And he had no idea that this was only the beginning. As Dawson followed Keanu through the streets of Metroville, his mind raced. The surreal nature of the moment was almost too much to process. Just a few hours ago, he had been invisible to the world, another nameless face lost in the shuffle of a busy city. Now, he was walking beside one of the most recognizable actors in the world, being offered a second chance. They arrived at a modest but clean budget hotel a few blocks away. The neon vacancy sign flickered above the entrance, buzzing softly in the cool night air. Keanu stepped inside and approached the front desk, speaking to the clerk in a calm, assured voice. "Got room for a few nights?" he said, sliding his card across the counter. The clerk barely looked up as he completed the transaction. Dawson, on the other hand, felt overwhelmed. A room? A bed? It had been months since he had slept anywhere other than a park bench or a shelter cot, where privacy was non-existent and every movement was a reminder of his circumstances. Keanu handed him the key with a small nod. "Go get cleaned up, I'll wait." Dawson swallowed hard. He didn't know how to thank him, didn't even know if words could cover the depth of gratitude swelling in his chest. He gave a stiff nod and made his way to the room. The shower was the first thing he noticed. He turned the knob and let the steaming water run, just standing there for a moment, letting the warmth seep into his bones. Layers of dirt and grime washed away, but more than that, so did a layer of shame. He scrubbed his face, his arms, his hands. Hands that once held steady wires, tools, and the power to build something. Hands that had fallen idle. When he finally stepped out, his reflection in the mirror shocked him. He looked different. Like a version of himself he thought had been lost. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. He opened it to find Keanu standing there with a fresh set of clothes. "Figured you'd need these," Keanu said with a knowing smile. Dawson hesitated but took them. They weren't fancy, just a simple hoodie, jeans, and a fresh pair of socks. But to him, they felt like the most valuable things in the world. He changed quickly, relishing the feeling of clean fabric against his skin. When he stepped out of the room, Keanu was still there, waiting patiently in the hallway. "Feel better?" he asked. Dawson nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Keanu replied. "But if you really want to, start by believing in yourself again." They left the hotel and continued walking. The city, which had once felt so cold and distant to Dawson, seemed just a little warmer now. He felt lighter, though he couldn't quite explain why. Eventually, they arrived at a small barber shop. The sign above the door read, "Mason's Cuts." Inside, an older barber greeted them with a friendly smile. "Got a walk-in?" the barber asked, glancing at Dawson. Keanu clapped Dawson on the shoulder. He could use a fresh start. Dawson hesitated but eventually sank into the chair. The barber draped a cloth around him and got to work. As the scissors snipped away the uneven, overgrown strands of his hair, Dawson felt another layer of the past falling away. The mirror reflected a transformation he hadn't expected. He wasn't just getting a haircut, He was reclaiming a piece of himself. When the barber finished, Dawson ran a hand over his neatly trimmed beard, feeling the smooth edges of his jawline again. "Looking sharp," Keanu said, nodding in approval. Dawson exhaled, a small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, I think so." But Keanu wasn't done yet. They walked a little farther until they reached a hardware store. The bright overhead lights cast long shadows on the rows of neatly arranged tools. Dawson stopped in the entrance, staring at the shelves stacked with everything from voltage testers to wire cutters. "Go ahead," Keanu said. "Pick what you need." Dawson turned to him, eyes wide. Keanu, this is too much. I can't accept." Keanu held up a hand. "This isn't charity, it's an investment. In you." Something inside Dawson shifted at those words. He looked back at the tools, the memories of his old life rushing back. He reached out, fingers brushing over a set of pliers, then a screwdriver. He carefully selected the essentials, tools he once knew, like extensions of his own hands. Keanu added a few extras, including a sturdy tool belt. When they reached the checkout, Dawson felt a lump in his throat. He had lost so much, but tonight, he was gaining something priceless: hope. Outside the store, Keanu made a quick phone call. Dawson caught snippets of the conversation, but couldn't make out the details. When Keanu returned, he looked satisfied. "Come on," he said. "I think you have an appointment." They walked for another 10 minutes before arriving at a low-key electrical company called Bright Core Electrical. The building was unassuming, but Dawson could hear the familiar hum of machines and the faint crackle of welding in the distance. Inside, a man in a collared shirt and ID badge greeted them. "You must be Dawson," he said, looking him over. "Keanu tells me you know your way around a circuit." Dawson shot Keanu a quick, stunned glance before nodding. Yeah, I do." The man, who introduced himself as Max, led them to a workbench. "This panel's been acting up. Fix it and we'll see what you've got." Dawson felt a rush of nerves, but he forced himself to focus. He picked up a screwdriver, his hands moving with an old familiarity. He assessed the wiring, traced the issue, and methodically worked through the repairs. When he finished, Max flipped the switch. The panel hummed to life, working perfectly. Max let out an impressed whistle. Not bad," he admitted. "We'll start you part-time. Prove yourself, and there's room to grow." Dawson stood there, stunned. Just hours ago, he was on the streets, holding a sign, hoping for a single dollar. Now, he had a job. Keanu patted him on the back. "Told you, you just needed a little help." Max smirked. "So, are you sticking around, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu chuckled. "My schedule's unpredictable, but I trust you'll give him a fair shot." Max sighed dramatically. "For you? Fine." Dawson looked at Keanu, his throat tight with emotion. "I don't know what to say." Keanu pulled a small card from his pocket and handed it to him. It was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. "Never doubt your own worth. We all have something meaningful to offer." Dawson swallowed hard. "How can I ever repay you?" Keanu smiled. "Pay it forward. Help someone else when you get the chance." With that, Keanu slipped into the night, disappearing into the city's vast expanse. He didn't wait for recognition, applause, or gratitude. He simply helped because he could. Dawson clutched the card in his hand, feeling the weight of the words. This wasn't just a lucky break. It was the start of something new. The next morning, Dawson arrived early at Bright Core Electrical, ready to work. As the hours passed, his confidence grew. He wasn't just fixing electrical panels, he was rebuilding his life. Weeks later, as he walked home, he spotted a man outside a grocery store holding a sign, "Hungry, please help." Dawson hesitated for only a second before stepping inside and buying 2 sandwiches. When he handed one to the man, their eyes met. "Thank you," the man said, voice full of disbelief. Dawson smiled. "This doesn't fix everything, but it's a start." The man took a shaky bite. "How can I ever repay you?" Dawson handed him the note Keanu had given him. "Pay it forward," he said. "That's how this works." And with that, he walked away, knowing his life had changed forever. Several months had passed since that night with Keanu, and Dawson's life had taken a turn he never thought possible. He had moved into a modest apartment, furnished with secondhand pieces he had carefully picked out after his first few paychecks. The walls were bare, the floor slightly scuffed, but to Dawson it was home. His job at Brightcore Electrical had started as part-time, but it didn't take long for Max to notice his skill and work ethic. Dawson wasn't just trying to impress anyone, he was proving to himself that he was still capable. He took on extra shifts, volunteered for complex jobs, and studied technical manuals late into the night. Within 3 months, Max offered him a full-time position, along with a company van and a steady paycheck. But even with stability returning to his life, Dawson couldn't shake the thought of the people he had left behind, the faces he had shared shelter beds with, the men and women huddled against storefronts late at night, hoping for kindness that rarely came. He had lived it, and now he felt a growing responsibility to help others the way Keanu had helped him. One evening, after a long day at work, Dawson stopped by a small diner near his apartment. It wasn't fancy, but the food was good, and the owner, an older woman named Marla, treated every customer like family. As he stirred his coffee, he noticed a young man sitting in a booth near the window. He was hunched over, his hoodie pulled low over his face, hands stuffed into the pockets of a jacket that had seen better days. Dawson knew that look, the way someone tries to make themselves invisible, to avoid judgment, to hide the fact that they have nowhere else to go. Without hesitation, Dawson signaled Marlo over. "Put whatever he orders on my tab," he said quietly. She gave him a knowing look but said nothing. Minutes later, she placed a burger and fries in front of the young man, who looked up in confusion. "I didn't order this," he muttered. Marla nodded toward Dawson. "He did." The young man hesitated, then slowly looked across the diner. Dawson gave him a small nod, a silent reassurance that there were no strings attached. After a long pause, the young man picked up the burger and took a bite. Dawson didn't press him to talk. He knew better than that. Sometimes, just knowing someone cared was enough. It wasn't long before Dawson found himself doing small acts of kindness regularly. A meal here, a job tip there. He even started carrying around spare gloves and socks in his work van, handing them out to those who needed them when the weather turned cold. One night, he received a phone call from a familiar voice. "I hear you're making a difference," Keanu said, amusement in his tone. Dawson chuckled. "You keeping tabs on me?" "Not exactly," Keanu replied. "Let's just say, kindness has a way of making its rounds." Dawson leaned against his apartment wall, staring out the window at the bustling city below. "You never explained why you stopped that night. Why me?" There was a pause on the other end. "Because someone once did the same for me," Keanu finally said. "A long time ago, when I was struggling, someone helped me. I never forgot it." Dawson exhaled slowly. "So this is just a cycle?" Keanu's voice was gentle. "Only if you choose to keep it going." Dawson smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the heating in his apartment. "Then I guess I've got work to do." Over the next year, Dawson's efforts to help others grew into something bigger than he had ever imagined. He partnered with local businesses to create a job placement program for people trying to rebuild their lives. He reached out to shelters, offering free electrical repairs in exchange for them providing better living conditions for those in need. One day, as he was installing a new set of outlets at a transitional housing center, a man in a crisp suit approached him. "I've been hearing about you," the man said. "Dawson, right?" "That's me," Dawson replied, wiping sweat from his brow. The man handed him a business card. "I'm Michael. I run a nonprofit that focuses on employment training for people coming out of homelessness. I think we could use someone like you." Dawson studied the card for a moment. A year ago, this kind of opportunity would have seemed impossible. Now, it felt right. He met with Michael a few days later and learned about the organization's mission. They didn't just offer jobs, they provided mentorship, financial literacy training, and emotional support. They helped people believe in themselves again. Dawson didn't need to think twice. He agreed to be part of it. It started small, just him offering electrical training to a handful of men and women looking for a fresh start. But soon, word spread and more people joined. Local businesses began reaching out, offering positions to those who had completed Dawson's training. Within 6 months, dozens of people who had once been in his shoes were back on their feet, working, thriving. One evening, as Dawson locked up the training facility, a familiar figure leaned against the wall outside. "Not bad," Keanu said with a smirk. Dawson laughed. Took a page out of your book. Keanu crossed his arms. I think you wrote your own. They stood there for a moment watching the city lights flicker in the distance. So what's next? Keanu asked. Dawson exhaled, a slow smile spreading across his face. I keep paying it forward, Keanu grinned. That's the best answer I could have hoped for. Dawson watched as Keanu disappeared into the crowd, just like he had that first night. But this time, Dawson wasn't left wondering what came next. He knew. Because kindness, once given, never really stops. It just keeps moving forward. The following weeks were a whirlwind of progress. Dawson split his time between his full-time job at Brightcore Electrical and his growing role at the nonprofit, helping train others who were once in his position. The work was exhausting but deeply fulfilling. Each time someone completed the program and secured stable employment, Dawson felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for them. They had taken the chance to rebuild, just as he had. But despite the victories, there were setbacks too. Some trainees struggled to stay on track, weighed down by past mistakes or the temptations of old habits. Others lost confidence when employers hesitated to take a chance on them. One evening, Dawson found himself sitting alone in the training facility after hours, staring at the faded handwritten note Keanu had given him all those months ago. Never doubt your own worth. We all have something meaningful to offer. He sighed, rubbing his temples. He had come so far, yet there were moments when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. What if he wasn't doing enough? What if the people he was trying to help still slipped through the cracks? A knock on the door startled him. He turned to see Michael, the director of the nonprofit, standing in the doorway. Thought I'd find you here, Michael said, stepping inside. You've been putting in crazy hours, man. Dawson chuckled tiredly. There's a lot of work to do. Michael sat down across from him. Yeah. And if you burn yourself out, there won't be anyone left to do it. Dawson hesitated. He hadn't realized how exhausted he truly was until that moment. You can't save everyone, Dawson, Michael said gently. You're doing incredible work. But you also have to remember that some people aren't ready yet, and that's okay. Dawson exhaled. He knew Michael was right. It wasn't about fixing people. It was about offering them a chance. What they did with that chance was up to them. The following morning, he arrived at Brightcore, ready to refocus. Max greeted him with a clipboard and an unexpected announcement. We're expanding, Max said. Taking on bigger contracts. I need someone I trust to lead a team. Dawson blinked. You're offering me a promotion? Max grinned. That a problem? Dawson laughed, shaking his head. No problem at all. His new role meant more responsibilities, but it also meant more opportunities. With his increased salary, he started funding a small emergency fund within the nonprofit for those in the program who needed an extra push. A deposit for an apartment, tools for a job, transportation assistance. One afternoon, he got a call from someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Dawson? The voice on the other end sounded hesitant. It's Ryan. Dawson froze. Ryan had been his closest friend before everything fell apart. Back when Dawson lost everything, Ryan had been one of the first to disappear. What do you want? Dawson asked, keeping his voice neutral. Ryan hesitated. I heard about what you're doing, about the job training, the program, and, he exhaled. I need help. Dawson's grip tightened on his phone. Part of him wanted to hang up. Ryan had abandoned him when he needed him most, so why should he extend a hand now? But then he thought about Keanu, about the second chance he'd been given. Meet me at the training center tomorrow, Dawson said finally. We'll talk. Ryan showed up the next day looking nothing like the guy Dawson had once called his best friend. He was thinner, his clothes slightly wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. Rough couple of years? Dawson asked as Ryan sat across from him. Ryan scoffed. Yeah, something like that. He ran a hand through his unkempt hair. I screwed up, got caught up in some bad choices. Thought I could get out on my own, but I can't, he exhaled. I was too ashamed to reach out before. Dawson leaned back. Why now? Ryan shrugged. I saw your story in the paper, what you've done, and I figured if anyone would understand, it's you. The local newspaper had done a feature on Dawson and the nonprofit a week earlier. He hadn't expected it to reach people from his past. For a long moment, Dawson studied Ryan. He wasn't the same person who had turned his back when things got tough. He was someone who had been broken, just like Dawson had been. "We don't do handouts here," Dawson finally said. "You want a fresh start? You work for it." Ryan nodded. "I will." It wasn't easy. Ryan struggled with the discipline the program required. There were days when Dawson wasn't sure if he'd follow through. But little by little, Ryan changed. He showed up earlier. He learned quickly. 6 months later, Ryan landed his first stable job in years. An entry-level electrician's assistant position. The same way Dawson had started. One evening, as they sat on Dawson's apartment balcony, Ryan looked over with a small smile. "I get it now," he said. "Get what?" Ryan gestured vaguely. "The whole pay it forward thing. I wouldn't be here if you hadn't given me a shot." Dawson smirked. "That's how it works," Ryan nodded, then pulled something out of his pocket. It was a folded handwritten note. I wrote this for you," Ryan said, looking a little embarrassed. "Figured it was my turn." Dawson took the note and unfolded it. "You were right, we all have something meaningful to offer. Thanks for reminding me." Dawson felt his chest tighten. It was just a note, simple words on paper, but it carried so much more than that. It was a full-circle moment. Dawson still kept Keanu's note in his wallet, but now he had another reminder. That kindness doesn't stop, it just keeps moving forward. A year later, Dawson found himself standing outside a familiar pizza shop. Grandin Pizza? It had been 2 years since the night that changed everything. As he stepped inside, he ordered a simple pepperoni pizza. The cashier smiled at him as she rang it up. "Here for dinner?" she asked. Dawson glanced outside, where he had spotted someone sitting against the brick wall, a young woman holding a cardboard sign. "Not for me," Dawson said, sliding his card across the counter. A few minutes later, he stepped outside, pizza box in hand. The young woman looked up, her eyes filled with both wariness and exhaustion. "Here," Dawson said, setting the box beside her. "Eat." She hesitated, then slowly opened it, the warm aroma filling the air. "Why?" she asked softly. Dawson smiled. "Because someone once did the same for me." As he walked away, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. As Dawson walked away from the young woman outside Grandin Pizza, a quiet realization settled over him. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was just another step forward. Every person he had helped, every opportunity he had created, had rippled outward in ways he couldn't always see. Some of those ripples would fade, lost in the natural course of life, but others would grow into something bigger than he could ever imagine. One evening, while reviewing training applications at the nonprofit, Dawson received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "A thank you from an old friend." Curious, he opened it and immediately recognized the sender's name, Iris, a former coworker from Bright Core Electrical. She had been one of the first to notice his work ethic, the one who had casually asked, "Did I hear right that Keanu Reeves helped you land this gig?" The email was long, filled with updates on her career and life, but one paragraph caught Dawson's attention. "I wanted to tell you something you probably don't know. A few months after you started at Brightcore, I was going through a tough time. I was ready to quit. Then, one day, I saw you. You were focused, determined, proving yourself every single day, and I thought, if Dawson can do it, so can I. So I stayed, and now I'm running my own electrical contracting business. You never knew it, but you inspired me when I needed it the most. Thank you." Dawson stared at the screen for a long time, letting the words sink in. He had never thought of himself as an inspiration. He had just been trying to survive, trying to make something of himself again. But somehow, just by existing, just by doing his best, he had unknowingly lifted someone else up. And wasn't that the whole point? The next morning, as he walked into the training facility, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The program had grown beyond anything he had initially envisioned. More local businesses had come on board, offering apprenticeships and full-time jobs to those who completed their training. Some of the first graduates had returned, not as students, but as mentors. As Dawson prepared for the day's session, he spotted a young man lingering near the entrance. His clothes were clean but wrinkled, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He had that same hesitant, uncertain look Dawson had once worn. Dawson walked over. "You here for the program?" The man hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I don't know if I can do it, though." Dawson smiled, recognizing the fear in his voice. It was the same fear he had once felt. "You don't have to know yet," Dawson said. "You just have to start." The man looked at him for a long moment before taking a deep breath and stepping inside. And just like that, the cycle continued. Not because of fate or luck or grand gestures, but because one act of kindness, no matter how small, always has the power to change a life. Want more? Check out the video on screen for another amazing story and hit subscribe to stay updated with our newest content.